Let's hit it. Hootie Hoot Productions presents the Sports Deli Podcast, where everyone deserves a seat at the table, where we discuss the intersection between race and sports, mental health, leadership, and equality. To find out more about the Sports Deli Podcast, check us out online at thesportsdelipodcast.com. We are starting to have free giveaways. If you hear giveaway anywhere in the podcast, send us an email to thesportsdeli@gmail.com with giveaway in the subject heading, and in the body of the email, give us the answer to that podcast's specific question.
Yeah. Stephen A. Smith is my alter ego. Go somewhere else with that shit.
John, she's roasting your ass right from the jump. We ain't done the intro yet. What the fuck?
To me, Colin Kaepernick is a hero.
And Colin Kaepernick is going to go down as a legend. And when George Floyd called out to his mother, he called out to all mothers. And I heard his call.
So do you have white privilege?
Absolutely.
I think there's a balance between the idea of universal white privilege, and it doesn't exist.
That now we have to be a voice as white people.
About it, African American women last year changed the course of this nation. Women are the backbone, and now we need to support the souls that they stand on.
And now, whether you're folding laundry, driving, exercising, or cooking, grab your favorite deli sandwich or bagel and your favorite beverage, and let's do this together in the Sports Deli. Auntie, take us away. We're so honored to welcome on the 17th day of Better Breakfast and National Blueberry Popsicle Month, veteran NFL writer Jim Trotter. Born in San Francisco, he graduated from Howard University in 1986. He's a storyteller. He used to work for ESPN, currently writes for NFL.com, and has covered the NFL for the greater part of 3 decades. He's a member of the NFL Hall of Fame Selection Committee. He's also worked for Sports Illustrated, covered the San Diego Chargers, now the Los Angeles Chargers, and is the former president of the Pro Football Writers of America.
True story. The term for president is 2 years, and I actually had to step down after a year when I joined NFL Network, because there is a provision bylaw that if you quote unquote work for the league, you're not allowed to not only be president, but not only be a member, which blew me away. So I'm not even a member of the group anymore, not by choice, but because of their bylaws.
Wow, that is
it's
that's
insane. It's insane.
I don't even know where to begin with that. What was the reasoning behind that? I mean, the first thing that always comes to mind when I think of laws now is there something with a hidden agenda or a hidden message behind it in some way? But I know that's probably not true in this case, but I don't know. It's the first thing that comes to mind now.
Yeah, no, that's not it at all. I think what it was is that these bylaws were put in place so long ago before the landscape of media coverage changed. And, back when this was done, you didn't have media members working for clubs, either for their website or no NFL Network or NFL.com at that time. And so I think when it was initially done, it was a way to protect the integrity of the organization from being influenced by, league employees. But again, as, the media coverage has changed, the proliferation of media outlets, the advent of NFL Network, NFL.com, and also longtime media members going over to work on team websites, to me, it seems that you should change the bylaws and update it. Because I can tell you this, as a member of NFL Network, NFL.com, I'm fighting for the same access they are, and that I've always fought for. And we don't get any preferential treatment, to my knowledge, working at NFL.com or NFL Network than I would if I were working at ESPN or Sports Illustrated. So instead of excluding people, I'm all about inclusion. Let's bring more people in. And it's just unfortunate that, it got to a point where I was told I could no longer be a member.
And so have you addressed it? Is there any thing that they're doing to
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge, no.
He's appeared on CNN, Fox News, ESPN, the NFL Network, and the Jim Rome Show, among others. He's written several books, 2 on the late Junior Seau. He was born the same year as Jack Del Rio, Mike McCarthy, Todd Bowles, defensive coordinator of the Super Bowl champ Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Chip Kelly, head coach at Notre Dame, John Gruden, head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, Whitney Houston, and Hakeem Olajuwon. He loves his Peloton, which he does not do in the morning. He prefers to do it later in the day. You can find him on Twitter at Jim Trotter. Trotter is Trotter, at Jim Trotter _NFL, where he has over 132,000 followers. So Hugh Jackson invited me, Brandon Marshall, Dr. Robert Livingston, and Dr. Judy Sweet. She doesn't like to be called doctor, but Judy Sweet, the first female president of the NCAA, are on a mission to, in a similar fashion that the Washington football team, the Cleveland Guardians, have adopted changes within their organizations because of the outpouring of support and cry for change, despite other people trying to tell organizations and people and indigenous people, et cetera, about themselves, which is one of the most frustrating things to me is the arrogance of people to tell other people about their own stories and their histories and tell them to get over themselves. And so this think tank that I'm a part of called Enough is, I don't know if you've heard of it or if Hugh has approached you about it, but we're trying to do more to educate and in a similar fashion with Washington and Cleveland, let advertisers know, et cetera, and owners, and educate them about the fact that the Rooney Rule is not working in its current form, as you know, as you smirk. And so what are your thoughts on this? Because I mean, this podcast is not just about getting great guests. It's about me trying to be a connector. I wouldn't call myself an influencer, but I want to hear stories about people's lives, and I want to do anything I can to not be complicit anymore, and to share information as much as I can. And so, this is one way that, as a byproduct of this podcast, that I was invited to help Leslie, who has worked with Oprah and others, to find a way to, I think, more educate and open doors and let owners know and people in upper management positions, whether it's Troy Vincent doing that or you or myself or anyone, because the reality is that white people listen to white people, people in the black and brown community listen to the people in black and brown community, owners listen to owners, et cetera. And so I just wondered I'm sorry, but it's a passion of mine, and I can't imagine how you feel. You just talked about all these spaces that you've been trying to fight for, not just for yourself, but for others your whole life. But it's so frustrating, and I can't imagine the accumulation effect that you felt all these years trying to navigate these spaces. So what are your thoughts when I talk about that?
Well, full disclosure, I was in the formative stages of Enough, that Hugh brought me in to bounce ideas off me and to talk to some of the people who were in there as he was putting this together. And I've participated in several conference calls that Enough has had with Leslie and the rest of them. So I want to make sure that I disclose that. I'm all for what Hugh is trying to do and what others are trying to do in terms of improving not only diversity within the NFL and college football, but also inclusion. It's tough. I've said this, and I mean it sincerely. When I talk to these men, these coaches, these personnel people of color who aspire to become head coaches and general managers, and you hear this sense of hopelessness in their voice, like nothing they do is ever going to be good enough. It does two things to me. It breaks my heart, and it makes me more committed to fighting for their cause, because all anyone ever wants is an opportunity, a fair opportunity. No one is being asked to be given anything. They are simply asking for an opportunity based on the merits of their work. And when you can objectively look at it and say, that the standards are not the same for non-Blacks as they are for Blacks, there's a problem. And so I applaud Hugh for fighting for this cause. I applaud, some members of the league office, including Troy Vincent, who are fighting to try and address this problem. I applaud Michael Loxley of the National Coalition of Minority Football Coaches for trying to address this problem for not only Blacks, but also women in college football. So it's my frustration truly is when I talk to someone like Jimmy Ray, who spent 4 decades, 5 decades, I can't remember now, in the NFL and coaching. And I ask him, do you see this problem changing, getting better, anytime? And he says, not in my lifetime. That's scary. That's sobering, that someone of his stature would feel that way, and not only feel that way, but be at the point where he's willing to talk about that publicly and acknowledge that. And to say that racism is systemic racism is so deeply embedded into what's happening that he can't see it changing in his lifetime. So I'm here to try and do whatever I can to sort of level this playing field and to give a voice to the voiceless and to make sure that we keep the focus on this issue, because it's very easy, particularly when games start being played and you have these exciting Thursday nights and Sunday nights and whatnot, to forget about all of this. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change. These men are still trying to climb that professional ladder and to achieve dreams that they've had maybe since they were children. We can't forget about that.
Sports Deli is sponsored by Sport RX, the leader in sport prescription eyewear. You can find them online at sportrx.com, and don't forget to enter the code DELI10 at checkout for your special 10% discount. And now back to this incredible interview right here in the Sports Deli. Oh man, this is a deep topic that, especially since the death of George Floyd, that I've tried to do a better job of educating myself. And I remember listening on Clubhouse recently where Mark Cuban came on and talked about this very issue in sort of an indirect way, where he said he's had talks with NFL owners, and he is one of the most successful, wealthiest people in the world as a white ally, along with others, Popovich and Steve Kerr, and there are others obviously in football as well. And I've been very critical of Tom Brady for not using his platform to say Black Lives Matter. It's been infuriating to me that he's done so much and he's gotten a pass, and he's got every right to do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to publicly come out. He can say whatever he wants, but I think it's doing the league and white people who have been complicit for far too long a disservice to not come out as often as possible as this stuff continues to get swept under the rug. And to your point that there are not more people of color in leadership positions to be able to climb that ladder in the same way. And Tom's the GOAT, but I don't wear his stuff anymore. As a Michigan guy, I almost want to cry about it because I loved him so much. And when he had an opportunity to use his platform to rise up and really stand for something that's more important than his 7 rings, he failed to do so. And so that's my opinion about that. And basically what Mark Cuban said was that, in not so many words, that they don't listen to him either. And if they're not listening to Mark Cuban, how are we going to get through and educate and change these narratives? Because if somebody like Mark Cuban isn't able to resonate with people in similar spaces as him in terms of business, then there's definitely something wrong. And this is a lot deeper than maybe we all imagine. I want to ask you, to that point, where is the disconnect to Mark Cuban's point and to what you're talking about? Why is it that the owners are so resistant to, or are they changing to this very issue? Where is the disconnect?
Well, I will tell you what the men involved say to me when I ask that question. And first and foremost, what they say to me is that they believe that there is an issue with comfort level. That we know that the vast majority of NFL owners are older white men and of wealth. And they feel more comfortable, according to the people that I've talked to, their belief that these owners are more comfortable hiring people who look like them, who may sound like them, who may share some of the same background, cultural experiences that they share.
But Jim, how do we demystify this?
I don't proclaim to have the answer, because I don't. I think it's silly. For me, it's this: if I owned a team or I owned a business, I want to hire the best people possible, right? And so the first thing I would do before I ever even got into an interview process with anyone, I would try and identify the traits that I want in a head coach. And Tony Dungy and I have had this conversation, and Tony Dungy has said that the NFL actually needs to have a course for owners on how to hire coaches, because they really don't know what to look for. So the very first thing I've said I would do is an owner should have to sit down and list all the traits and qualities he wants in a head coach, he or she wants in a head coach. Do you want someone younger or someone older? Do you want someone with a coordinator experience or not? Do you want someone on offense or defense? Do you want someone who's more of a hands-on guy or someone who's a delegator? Do you want someone who's a great communicator in terms of with the media or whatnot, or someone who connects with his players? Have a box, all those things. And then I say, go out and form your list and interview these people. And then when you're done and you hire someone, go back and look at that list and let's see how many of those boxes you actually checked off in terms of meeting the traits and the qualities that you want in a head coach. I don't think that's done enough. I think what owners do, again, is they get into these interviews and who do they feel comfortable with? And sometimes they can be persuaded based on how an interview goes in terms of who did they relate to, who may have impressed them in that way, winning the interview. Winning the interview does not mean you're going to win games. And so
losing the interview for that matter.
Exactly. So the other thing I would say to you is we have focused so much on coaches. I truly believe now that part of the problem is above that. It's the GM and the president level at these organizations. Because what happens is when the owner is ready to make that decision, typically the person who has his or her ear last is either the GM or the club president. Well, we know there's only one Black club president in the entire NFL. We know now that there are only, I think, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, it's been a minute, but I think there are only, 3 to 5 Black GMs, if memory serves me right. So we're not even at the table when these decisions are being made. And so I focus less now on the number of head coaches as opposed to the process of how do we get more diversity among head coaches. We need to be at the table when these decisions are being made, and we're not there. And here's what frustrates me most. And this owner doesn't speak for everyone, but recently I said to an owner point blank, why does the NFL have such a hard time hiring Black people in decision-making positions?
Sports Deli is sponsored by PSK. You can find them online at lids.com, pskcollective.com, tjmax.com, walmart.com, and now Kohl's department store at kohls.com. And now back to this incredible interview right here in the Sports Deli.
And initially this owner tried to characterize it as, hey, players get I think he said 70% of the dollars, the revenues in the NFL, which we know is not true. But I kept pushing him. He kept kind of pushing back. And finally, he got to a point where he said to me, I'm being defensive on this because I kind of feel like I'm being attacked. And I said, I'm not speaking of you individually. I'm speaking of the collective as it relates to owners. And ultimately, what he said to me was, if Black people feel this way, then they should buy a team and hire whoever they want to hire. Which I then said to him, well, are you going to change the rules for purchasing a franchise? Because as you know, the way the rules are set up now, how many people of color actually have the wealth to be able to write a check not their net worth, but to be able to sit down and write a check for 30% of the value of a club when they purchase it. So if we conservatively say that the next NFL club is going to sell for $3 billion, which I believe it will be more than that, but let's just say conservatively $3 billion. Well, you've got to sit down as a prospective owner and write a check for $900 million. How many people can sit down and write a check for $900 million? There aren't many that I know, particularly in communities of color. So from that standpoint, the rules are rigged against that as well. So I keep pushing on these things, and I'm going to continue to push on them until I no longer have a platform to push.
Oh, fascinating. Let's rewind. Where you talked about you have a platform now that you didn't necessarily have when you went to Howard. And so can you talk about your experience? I'm fascinated by people's experiences, especially people like you that lived in the civil rights era. I know you were young, the first civil rights era, or maybe the second.
I was really young.
Right, you were a baby. But nonetheless, you still have that claim that you were, living in an era where you could still sense the vibrations, even as a kid, when you have two assassinations of arguably two of the most important people in the history of the United States. And so then, you're a kid in the 70s. And so what was it like growing up? Who were your influences and why an HBC?
Well, it's an interesting question. I as a kid, I didn't feel impacted by the civil rights movement, to be honest. I mean, we were just trying to survive day to day, year to year. I grew up single parent household, which is not to say my father wasn't around, but it was a single parent household, and we were rent hopping every year. So we had, or at least in my mind as a child, there were other issues beyond just that. But the way I got to Howard was neither of my parents graduated from high school. My mother went back in her 50s and got her GED, but neither parent graduated from high school. So college was never really talked about a lot in my house. I was fortunate enough in high school that I had a counselor who was like, no, you're going to go to college. It was a Black woman named Brenda Bias, and I was going to a predominantly white high school. And so she was very conscious of, making sure that students of color realized there was more out there and that they got on the right track. And so she stayed on me. Well, long story short, I was a member of the Black Student Union in high school, and my senior year we had a state convention, and it was held on the campus of UCLA. And one of the forums was historically Black colleges and universities. I had never heard of an HBCU up to that point. And as I sat in on this forum, I could just feel my mind opening, and it just hit me that I want to go. And one of the schools that was represented was Howard. And so now this is the spring, and
it's late.
Yeah, it's very late. So I applied and I got accepted. Well, I didn't have the money to go. So I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to spend 2 years getting my my general ed courses, and then I'll transfer. And that's what I did. I went to Cal State Hayward, which is now Cal State East Bay, for 2 years. Wow. Got a lot of my general ed courses out of the way, and then I transferred back to Howard. And the thing I say about that now today is, here we are. I graduated in '86. I'm terrible at math, but we're talking 35 years later, something like that. And if you ask me, I would go back and do it all over again. That's how much I love my experience there and how much it has impacted me being where I am today. So that's how I got to an HBCU. I was late to the game. But once I learned of it, it was where I wanted to be. And once I hit campus, I just felt like I was at home.
Wow, that's amazing. Did you engage in any sports growing up or in high school? Or
Yeah, I did. But
yeah,
I had offers to play some small college football, but I knew I was never going to play in the NFL. So I've always in my thinking had sort of conservative thinking where I'm not a huge risk taker.
right.
And so I said to myself, look, you can go to some school and play small college football, or you can go prepare yourself to have a profession. And I chose to focus on having a profession. And From the time that I started in college, I knew this is what I wanted to do, and that's where my focus was.
What an amazing testament to, with all the cynicism going on probably back then, to have someone as an ally and an advocate and an educator, a counselor. It just tells you that all it takes is one person to plant a seed.
Oh, no question.
Ah, man, what if she hadn't made that suggestion that day? You know, what if she allowed her personal life to get in the way of her job, and she hadn't made that suggestion that day? God, that is just amazing.
It wasn't just a suggestion. She stayed on me.
She stayed on you.
Yeah, and that was part
Oh,
of the key, because I was one of those kids, again, single parent household. Back then we were on the school I was at, we were on what we call the module system, which is like a college system, which means you don't go to school from 9 to 5 every day. I shouldn't say 9 to 5. What would it be? 8 to 2 or 3, whatever.
yeah.
But it was a college system where you would go to class some days and some days you might not have class. Well, my junior year, I just decided after football season was over, kind of take this semester off, and literally walked out with a bunch of D's and C's. And all of a sudden it was like, wow, what were you doing? But I was home sleeping, because there was no one there to stay on me. And she got on me, and I came back my senior year and was basically straight A, and still couldn't get my GPA back to above a 3 because of that one semester where I decided to be a goofball.
Right.
But she stayed on me, and thankfully she did, and helped me, and I ended up getting on the right track.
That's an incredible story. And I want to ask you real quick, because I do want to go and transition into Dion and Eddie George and Hugh Jackson for a second. But I remember going to a game at Lincoln University. I was scouting as a college basketball coach, and the atmosphere in that place for the basketball game. I mean, I have never been. I've been to a lot of games. Sports Deli is sponsored by Moolah Kicks. Moolah is MOOLAH, like money, moolah, and kicks like shoes, one word. You can find them online at moolahkicks.com, and it's the first ever female-only brand basketball shoe. So it's a shout out to the basketball street culture, and it is also about fighting social injustice and gender inequality worldwide and here in the United States. And again, you can find them at moolahkicks.com. And now back to this incredible interview right here in the Sports Deli, in a lot of places. And I have never in my life, I mean, this is Lincoln University in the middle of nowhere. And this gym was packed. I mean, and there obviously weren't many white people in the gym, and me and my one of my co-hosts were two of them. And it was when I tell you, like, they were getting on the refs, like they were yelling all kinds of stuff that I can't repeat here. Like, but the experience was. Can you talk about your experience at sporting events at an HBC? Like, I don't think people really have a true understanding of not just the marching band, because that's really what people associate with them a lot of times. But man, talk about the sporting events at HBCs. It is like nothing else.
No, but I think what you said, starting with the bands, is true. The football games at HBCUs, often it's not about the game. It's about the atmosphere, the environment, and it's about the bands. And so it's always funny to me when networks will do HBCU games and they don't understand that, they want to talk during halftime and dissect the game. Well, no, people are tuning in to see the bands. So
Right.
halftime is more important to them than the game itself often. So, and that's where, again, it comes back. If you have a diverse production crew or producing crew who understand the history of HBCUs and what they're about, you're going to be in those meetings and you're going to say, no, we're not having a discussion at halftime. We're going to focus on what's taking place on the field, because that's what most of those fans are there for, and most of the people watching. So again, it was my first time being at an HBCU, and I get to the stadium for the football game, and I'm ready for the game and whatnot. And all of a sudden the band starts playing, and people are, singing along or just kind of bopping along with it and whatnot. And I'm like, oh my God, this is just unlike anything I have ever been a part of. And people say, well, marching band, well, you got Ohio State and these other places. Folks, I'm here to tell you, it is a different experience.
Oh.
And you cannot there's just no way not to get caught up in it. It's just phenomenal. So I miss it to this day. I live out on the West Coast.
Yeah.
I live in San Diego, and to not be able to experience that on the regular during football season or even during basketball games is truly a disappointment to me.
Oh man. And that reminds me, the other, that was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had. The other one was when I went to Dunbar High School in Baltimore. And every time out, there's a step show going on. And that gym was as losing their mind as the Lincoln game. And I mean, there's just something different. And that's just one of the things. Can you imagine if an NFL owner went to Dunbar High School and watched that, or went to an HBC and just was a part of that? Like, you think they're going to sit there like just conservatively holding their hands and crossing their, you know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of stuff that if you just let them understand the cultural things that are out there, just to say, it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense to not give them seats give people of minority position and Black and brown community seats at the table, because they add value. And Jelani McCoy came on this show and talked about how there's a $9 billion industry in the entertainment and computer industry, and that they purposely do not allow people in these spaces into their spaces because they don't want to lose that control. So these types of things are out there in every area, but there's this fear, instead of it can enhance the businesses. And it's just mind blowing. I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but let me ask you about Deion and Eddie at Jackson State and Tennessee State. And, obviously he's getting a lot of exposure, doing a lot of things with social media, leveraging his platform. But are we going to see more of this? Sports Deli is sponsored by City Lokes, CITYLOCS. You can find them online at citylokes.com, where you can go and make your own personalized license plate hats. They're so cool. You got to check them out. And don't forget to enter the code TheSportsDeli at checkout for your special 10% discount. And now back to this incredible interview right here in the Sports Deli.
Right.
Yeah, you are. I know for a fact that there are other Hall of Fame players, Black players, former players who have been approached about coaching at HBCUs. And one of them told me privately that the timing just wasn't right this year, but it is not something that he has ruled out in the future. So I do think you will see more of it. It's sad to me that someone like Hugh Jackson would have to go down to, when I say go down to, I don't mean that in a demeaning way or disparaging way.
No, because he just wants to coach. He told me he just loves coaching. He just wants to be on the green. So wherever it happens organically, it's going to happen. But I just want to make sure I clarify that it's not necessarily a step down, because I coach at a low income first generation high school after 23 years at the college level, and I absolutely do not see it as a step down. It's the best job I've ever had. So to that point, just because you're coaching at a low Division I HBC school, Hugh Jackson is a brilliant mind, and wherever it takes him, but he just wanted to be a part of something bigger than himself. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have to be an ally in these spaces to make sure that people understand, Hugh Jackson was just trying to, he's bitter and, whatever, man, come on, man. We're not about that on this show. So go ahead, continue your point. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good. My point was Hugh Jackson should be in the NFL. He should be at the highest level possible. He's that good of a coach. And I think back to when he got let go by the Raiders and how he couldn't find a job in the NFL. And it took Marvin Lewis to hire him for him to have a job, which is criminal to me. So for him not to be employed by the NFL, to me, is an NFL problem, not a Hugh Jackson problem. Right. So I'm happy that he's down with Eddie and helping, because he's going to have a tremendous influence on these kids in terms of not only making them better players, but hopefully better men. And to your question earlier, there will be more who will follow in the footsteps of Eddie and Deion.
Mm-hmm.
And I applaud that. My hope is that Eddie and Deion bring more visibility to HBCUs, and that more athletes will give them consideration. You know, the reality is, if you're a talented football player or you're a talented basketball player, the professional teams are going to find you, you know? So now, is that to say that there isn't bias against you because you're at an HBCU? Yeah, there is. I mean, I had one GM tell me he's upset that he feels that they don't take HBU seriously, that scouts will go in there simply to check a box and not really to scout and evaluate these players. My hope is that with Deion and Eddie and when others come in, that'll change. Because as I said before, there's no way you can tell me, and I refuse to accept, that there was only one or no HBCU players who were worthy of being drafted this past year. It's ridiculous. So yeah, you're going to see more former NFL stars following the footsteps of these guys, and hopefully that again brings more visibility, more players being drafted, and just more coverage to our HBCUs.
Well, I think in order for there to be a shift, there has to be a movement, and there are strength in numbers. So if you go back to people that have stood out, from John Carlos to the Arthur Ashes to the Kareems, and you go forward, right? So they didn't do anything different than Colin didn't do. But ever since then, and then Bruce Maxwell in Major League Baseball, who was on our show as well. And so, but there's a shift now, and this is the point I'm trying to make, where there are strength in numbers, that you're not called out as much, you're not blackballed in the same way. And so now you're encouraged to speak out in a way that we have never in our lifetime before. There are more white allies from my perspective, and I don't know how you feel, than I've ever seen before, especially since the death of George Floyd. So now we've seen a shift in people speaking out, where you're not going to lose endorsements. You're not going to see a different contract as a result of you speaking out, because there's too many people coming together in these spaces, whether it's women in the NCAA not having a weight room, or other things that have happened. But to Ryan Harris's point, who came on this show, he wants to always ask why. He doesn't shake his head anymore necessarily. It's an opportunity for a conversation.
Why what?
Like, why are there people that are why are people racist? Why do these things continue to happen? Why are there not more black coaches? So anything that happens now, anything short of death, is an opportunity to expose the ludicrousness of the current system in its many layers. And so I think in the same way that you're talking about, I'm trying to land my plane here. And what you're talking about is with HBCs or men and women of color in these leadership positions, in particular with the NFL, that you're going to see a shift, because these various seeds are being planted in the same way that people speaking out now is encouraged, that you're going to see this gradual shift over time. Hopefully it's not going to take several generations. And so I think we're moving in the right direction, but we have to keep putting pressure in your way, in my way, in the players' way, and it can't just be great games, so let's forget about it. I think it has to be a collective effort across the board, and there are strength in numbers. Sports Deli is sponsored by PSK. You can find them online at lids.com, pskcollective.com, tjmax.com, walmart.com, and now Kohl's department store at kohls.com. And now back to this incredible interview right here in the Sports Deli.
You know, Michael, I want to be optimistic, but I'm going to be completely honest. I don't feel optimistic. I feel like Jimmy Ray feels to some degree. I mean, look at this. We have the NFL talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion, right? And we focus on head coaches and GMs, and we know there are issues there. But to me, that's the tree, and we're missing the forest. And the forest is the NFL as a whole has a problem when it comes to hiring Blacks in decision-making positions. When you look at the league office, of their top 12 or 13 executives, I believe there are only 2 Blacks among those 12 or 13. When you look at our NFL media group, Now we are covering a league whose player pool is 70% Black. There is not one Black person among the senior managers at NFL media who on the daily are at the table when decisions are being made, how these players are going to be covered. That's a problem to me. So when you have an owner who can say to me, well, if Blacks feel some kind of way about a lack of diversity at head coaching and GM positions, then buy their own club and hire who they want.
So what's the difference between the NBA and the WNBA in terms of advocacy?
I don't have an answer for you because I don't know the NBA that well to be able to speak on it. I only know I've been covering the NFL now for 3 decades.
But are the players doing enough in the NFL? Should they protest more?
If they were to protest, of course they could have an impact. But here's where their business model is so genius, and I say they're diabolical geniuses, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. They have created a business model where by the time these players are mature enough to actually figure out what's going on, they've replaced them. So if the average career span of a player is 3.5, 4 years, well, you come into the league at 21, at 25, 26, you're on your way out at a time where you start to figure out that this isn't a game, this is a business, and the leverage and the impact that you can have. So in the NBA, players are on a roster for, it's not uncommon, for 10 years, that sort of thing. So they're around longer. They have more power in that way, that they grow up and understand what it is and are able to fight. And there are fewer of them. You're talking about how do you get roughly 2,000 players who vary in age, but many of them are young. How do you get them all on the same page when they know that they have a finite window to earn a living? So if I'm a young player and I know I have only, on average, let's say 4 years in the league, I've got to maximize my earnings while I can. So if we were to, let's say, strike, which is prohibited in the collective bargaining agreement, but let's say they were to do that, how many of them, how long are they going to sit out and give up those paychecks knowing that they only have, let's say, 4 years to earn their money?
There were things that were prohibited in the NBA collective bargaining agreement also, and they violated it. And Tom Brady doesn't have a 4-year window. And so, I understand what you're saying.
Right, but that's the problem here. The Tom Bradys, there are only so many of those. And if you go back to the times that the NFL had strikes, player strikes, back in 82, and I think it was 87, if I remember right, look at who crossed the picket line. It wasn't the rank and file. It was the stars who said, basically, we want our money. And they crossed the picket line. So my point being, it would be very difficult for you or me, if we were running the union, to get 2,000 players to say, give up your money for the greater good, and for what can happen down the line. It may not impact you at this moment, but it's going to impact future generations. Some guys are so young that they don't realize the importance of that yet, and by the time they do, they're out of the league. So I'm trying to understand it myself, and maybe what I'm saying isn't true. I do know that it is a reality that there's fear within the union that if they were to ever try and go down that road, they wouldn't be able to get everybody on board. It was hard enough to keep everybody together back in 2011 during that labor agreement when there was a work stoppage. So that's the reality of what we live in. But there's no question, if the players ever did come together and say, as a collective, these things are unacceptable and we're not going to tolerate them, and therefore we're not going to play, there's no question the owners would have to respond to that. But I also make this point, it's not just about them. And I've heard this from people not only in the league, but out of the league. And Hugh will tell you this, we've had these conversations. The way you make change in the NFL, history has taught us, is by 2 ways. One is the threat of litigation or actual litigation. Remember, the Rooney Rule came around because Johnny Cochran, the late Johnny Cochran, and Cyrus Mehri threatened to go after the NFL's antitrust status for discriminating against coaches of color. And that's when the Rooney Rule came into effect. And we saw incremental increases in the number of minority head coaches who were being hired. The other threat that gets their attention is when you talk about going after sponsors or upsetting sponsors. And we saw that with Washington last year when all of those things were going on and FedEx and others were talking about pulling out. And what did we see? We saw change. So if I am a player and I want change, and I'm talking about players as a collective, those are two avenues that are proven that lead to change in the NFL. And that's the threat of litigation or the threat of going after sponsors, period. And I say, you know, in the conversations I've had with folks, if you were to go to these sponsors and say, do you support an organization that discriminates against people of color, make them answer the question.
Well, the NBA did it. The WNBA has done it. The WNBA got an owner to have to force an owner out and changed an election. So it's definitely possible. The NCAA has been completely stripped of its current form because of inadequate leadership. And so to that point, I think the NFL should be ashamed of themselves. And I'm not talking about the players because, to your point, it's a difficult situation for the players. But I would say the social media is a third way that organizations are probably afraid of, as much as litigation these days, because if you put
But why
pressure.
are they afraid? But why are they afraid of social media? Because social media speaks to their sponsors.
Exactly.
And they are afraid that that will impact sponsors. So again, it's two things, at least as I have studied this historically. It is the courtroom, the threat of the courtroom, and the threat of the boardroom, where they can lose money there. Those are the two ways that I personally, in doing research, have seen change in the NFL.
Absolutely.
Everything else, to me, being honest, is sort of performative. You know, you can talk about football as family and diversity is important and this, that, and the other, but the numbers don't back that up. And that's not just on the field. Again, that's at the league office and that's at NFL media. The numbers don't support it. So it's not me saying it. It's the data saying it.
It's interesting. When I heard Steph Curry and others on Race and Sports in America on the Golf Channel, and I heard Michael Smith on NBC, talk about a number of things. Jim Caldwell was on that call and some other coaches. I don't know if you saw it. It's a business like you talked about. And so the one thing that I will say to NFL players, and I don't know if I'm the person to say this, but I'm just going to share my takeaway from when I listened to Race and Sports in America. And it wasn't just necessarily the message. It was the body language of Steph Curry. And what I took from that was that he wants to be remembered as not just the greatest shooter of all time, that he wants to be remembered as somebody who influenced the Black and brown community, as a Black man, as a husband of color, as a family man, and to change these narratives as much as anything in his life. And I would say to any professional athlete, the question I pose is, what do you want your legacy to be? And of course, we all want to put food on our table and we want generational wealth. And there's a lot of things that are important, especially to change culturally and generationally. But there are things that are worth fighting for that are more important than money. And like I said from the beginning, if there's anything that I can ever do to educate and send messages to people out there in this, to shed a light on this topic, I just think there's nothing more important to bridge these two narratives that are going on in this country. Still, even though life is better for people of color, there are still too many laws and too many things going on in sports where there are so many things that are unequal, and we need to change these things. So I would just say to all the players out there, just think about it. And so there are strength in numbers.
Alexander Madison said exactly that to me. It was after George Floyd's murder, and I was doing a story about this. The story was basically about the empowerment of players and the rise in them standing up. And I said, why are we seeing more of it now? And he said, there is strength in numbers. And then he said, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, if you do something to one of us, meaning discipline, you do it to all of us. And he said, we are not going to stand for it. And I think that more players do feel empowered now because they have spoken out, and they're going to stand up for other players who speak out. And sadly to say, I would be surprised if I saw another player be treated the way that Colin Kaepernick has been treated. I really would be surprised, because I don't think the players today, now having gone through what they've gone through, having seen the way that Colin was treated, would accept that. So I would, and there's not a lot that shocks me when it comes to the NFL, but I would be shocked if we ever saw another player treated the way that Colin was treated. And that disappoints me from the standpoint that it never should have cost Colin his career, but it also, I feel somewhat empowered, or that these players are now somewhat empowered because they've learned from it, that they're not going to let it happen again.
Well, and they should freaking leverage it, and in more ways, I think, to your point. And Colin obviously was not the first. Jim Brown, there were others, in the NFL that stood for this kind of thing. And
yeah, but
so
they weren't blackballed.
they were not blackballed. That's true.
Correct. No, player activism goes back decades. And that's why I always get a kick out of people who think it just started with Colin.
Right.
But the difference is that he was blackballed because of it. No matter what you say or what you believe, and from the beginning I was arguing this, there were not 32 quarterbacks better than Colin Kaepernick. It was ridiculous.
Make that totally ridiculous.
Just crazy. So I feel bad that this cost him his career, but in the same way, he has done something that's going to stand the test of time, and which is actually much more important than a career. So I can say personally,
but it's not enough, right? You feel like there's something missing still.
Oh, absolutely, because an injustice was done. He never should have lost his career because of this. The one thing I will say, people ask me about my career and this, that, and the other. And one of the things that Colin did in taking a knee and standing up for others is he forced me to evaluate what my purpose is in this job. And I think it's so easy when you first become a sports writer, you get caught up in the games and the feature and being around the players and reporting news and all of that. And as a Black man, what I realized, I've got a more important purpose here, and he helped me crystallize that.
Are you talking about humanizing people?
Not just humanizing them, but giving a voice on something bigger than football to these players, and to see them as men and not just as players. And so
Black men, mostly.
Black men, but men as people.
Yeah.
And what I said is that however long I have left in this business, and I don't know how long that is, but I'm going to use my platform to give a voice to these men and to speak out against the injustices that take place within this game and this league. And I'll never forget when the story first came out that he took a knee. It was the third week of the preseason. So the next week, they're getting ready to play their final preseason game. And now the focus is clearly on him because the story had come out following the previous game. And they go to San Diego, which is where I live, and I get assigned the game. And I'm working at ESPN at the time, and I'm doing a hit before the game. And it's Military Appreciation Night in San Diego. And here you have Colin Kaepernick taking the stand, which folks are up in arms about and whatnot. And I'll never forget that the host back at Sports Center starts to frame the question to me in a way that implies that Colin is doing something wrong and that it's a bad thing and yada, yada, yada. And I'll never forget, in my mind, I literally had to make the decision of, do I just let this person say this? Or do I, as uncomfortable or awkward as it may be, correct this person about what it was Colin was taking a knee for? And I said in my mind, I'm going to correct the person. And so I said on air right to this person, no, that this is not what he's doing. He is standing up against, as he has said, police brutality against people of color. And why is that a bad thing? So, and from that point forward, that was always my objective, to make sure, at least as I spoke on it, as best I could, make sure it was framed in the way that he meant it, and to not let people hijack his message and say that he was doing something wrong here. Because as I always say, if we can't start the discussion with an agreement that police brutalizing people of color is wrong, then there's no discussion for us to have. That's just, I'm not going to waste my energy on you trying to convince you if you can't, off the top, agree that police brutality against people of color is wrong. And that's how I feel.
And it exists.
Without question,
it still
exists. Come on now.
Not to some people.
Well, those are the people I can't waste my energy.
Right. Absolutely.
Because we have those out there who, regardless of science, regardless of data, regardless of facts, are going to believe what they want to believe. And I'd rather waste my energy on people who are trying to do good, as bad as that may sound. I don't have.
It doesn't sound bad, and I agree with you. But that's why I think it's important that even if the same message is shared by Tom or you or me in these different spaces, that it matters, because there are different segments of the population that will listen to different people, even if the same message is being told by that other person.
But here's what I would say about Tom as well. It's just my attitude towards this as well. If you don't want to be an advocate, a public advocate in the fight, that's your prerogative.
It is.
It's your choice. What I don't want then is for you to get in the way of the fight. So stay out of the way. So for instance, with Tom, fine, you don't at the time, because he's done some things since where he has put his name on things with the Players Coalition and whatnot. But initially, if you don't want to be in this fight, that's your prerogative. But then don't put a Make America Great hat up in your locker and those sorts of things, where silently now it appears that you are with the other group. Okay? And that's all I ask, is just don't get in the way.
All right. I know your time's valuable. Can we get to the rapid fire, and then we'll let you go on about your very busy day, I'm sure. Okay. Will the Lions ever win a Super Bowl in your lifetime?
Oh, you never say never. I mean, you don't. I mean, I don't see it right now, but I would never say never.
So frustrating. Snoopy or Charlie Brown?
Charlie Brown, because I have a heart,
That's a great answer. Sweetness or Barry Sanders?
Oh man, come on. That's just so unfair.
You can say there's a tie. I mean, it's fine.
Oh, but I'll say
two different runners.
That's like asking me cake or ice cream. The correct answer is both.
Okay, fair enough. Tom Brady or Joe Montana?
Brady, and I'm a San Francisco native who had always said Joe is the greatest. But when you win 7 Super Bowls, play till you're 44 now, it's insane. I remember asking Byron Leftwich last year during the break before the Super Bowl, you played the position, you're a former first round pick and whatnot. Could you have ever imagined playing at that time at 43 years old? And he just laughed us off of the camera. He's like, no, are you kidding? So to see what Tom is doing, as he said, it's just mind blowing. So he truly is, as much as I hate to say it over Joe, he's the greatest.
You had to pick a coach to win a game. Would you pick Sean Payton or Bill Belichick?
Belichick, because he's done it consistently.
Yeah. What was the bigger football mistake? The Seahawks not running the ball in the 15 Super Bowl, or Leon Lett of the Cowboys touching the ball after the blocked field goal in 93?
The Seahawks, because the Cowboys still won a championship.
That's true. Biggest blown call by the refs. 2018 NFC Championship game where the ref missed the pass interference call inside the 10-yard line. the 1998 Thanksgiving Day coin toss controversy, or the tuck rule from the Raiders and Patriots from 2002?
I was at 2 of those games.
Wow.
So, I was at the tuck rule game. I
Oh,
was actually on the sideline during that. And actually, it was one of the greatest quotes after. This was before the NFL had even blown up to where it is now. And so they had the interview tent for the Raiders was actually outdoors. And so it's cold as heck out there.
right.
All of that. Charles Woodson gets up at the podium and we ask him about the call. And I'll never forget his answer. It was one word. He just said, bullshit. And I tell him that all the time when I see him. I say, that's one of the greatest quotes ever, to an answer. And nothing else needed to be said. He just said, bullshit.
Oh, man.
But to answer your question, to me, that the missed call in the Saints game against the Rams, to me, it's still inexplainable that you don't make that call. It was flagrant.
Brutal.
So, anyway,
I mean, there's one thing to have to live with something, like Houdini,
Right.
but with that play call, but when it's out of your hands like that, oh God, MJ or LeBron,
Oh, MJ.
Willie Mays or Hank Aaron?
Oh, I'll say Willie because Willie was he was a 5-tool guy,
Yeah.
Oh man, Willie was phenomenal. So as much as I love Hank, but I want to say this too though about Hank, in light of all the discussion we're having about all of this, talk about a man of principle,
Oh,
just class and dignity.
how he went about his business.
Yeah, humility, just
Oh,
man, I'm just
lost for words.
one of those guys I wish
Yeah.
I could have spent time around, just to have talks with, not even to write about or whatever, but just to learn from, to try and absorb some of that wisdom that he has. It's man, he'll be missed.
He'll definitely be missed. Oh, Tiger or Jack?
Tiger.
Kobe or Larry Bird?
Here's the interesting thing about this. People sometimes try and give me grief about this. I say if I'm putting together a starting 5, I can't do it without Larry Bird in my lineup. I can't. To me, he's one of the greatest.
Talk about a 5-tool player.
Yeah, ever.
Oh,
I mean,
oh.
a guy who wanted that ball in his hands in critical moments. So if you're asking me Kobe or Larry, it would depend on what I need. But I can find another 2-guard, but I can't find another 3 who can play the way Larry did. So I would have to say Larry then.
How did Kobe's death affect you?
More than anything, I as I get older, I thought about his family. His wife has now left to raise, his 3 other daughters by herself. I thought about his daughter that passed with him.
Oh,
I know a lot of people thought about the legacy and all of that and whatnot, but I thought about it on a more human level. And
oh,
it makes you go hug your own a little bit tighter. So how did it affect me? It reinforced the
fragility.
the importance of life and loved ones.
Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame?
Yes,
Waffles, pancakes, or French toast?
all 3.
Bigger upset. NC State upsetting Houston in the 83 men's basketball NCAA championship. Villanova beating Georgetown in the 85 men's basketball championship.
That one hurt a lot because going to school in DC, I was there when Patrick and those guys were there. So
Right.
I had great affection for that club and John Thompson and those teams.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a hard question because Villanova shot the lights out that night. But
Oh my God.
They had played. I guess the bigger upset would be, I would say, NC State because they hadn't played Houston that season. Villanova had played Georgetown multiple times that year,
Good
being
point.
in the conference. So they had an understanding of what Georgetown was all about and whatnot. So I guess I would say NC State.
bigger upset, Patriots losing to the New York Football Giants in Super Bowl 42, or the 1980 Miracle on Ice, where the U.S. hockey team upset the Soviet Union for the gold?
I guess it would be hockey based on the history. So
Steph Curry or Isaiah Thomas?
Two different players.
Well,
yeah, I mean, but they're two different players.
They are.
To me, Isaiah is arguably, the greatest 5'10" under player.
Right.
And Steph is obviously the greatest shooter, pure shooter in the history of the game. So they're two different guys, and as I look at them,
you think a basketball guy like me would ask a better question?
No, you're good. It would depend on what I needed,
So if you were going to put one of them with Larry, who's the better fit with Larry?
Initially I was going to say Isaiah because of his ability to penetrate and pass, even though Steph has the handle as well. But I would say I'd put Steph with him and spread the floor. They could both shoot the three. They could both shoot the three. But you got to have the other complementary parts around them if you're going to do that too. So when you ask me these questions, it's because this is like the Twitter world where you got 240 characters or whatever it is, and you got to have an opinion, and this is it. And nuance gets lost into it. So for me, context is so important. How am I building my team? How am I structuring my team? Those sorts of things. So it's hard to answer.
It was truly an honor. I appreciate it. Maybe we'll get back on at some point down the road. Much love and respect. Keep doing what you're doing, and I genuinely appreciate your time.
No, man, it's my pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
All right, talk to you soon.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
All right, you got it. All right, bye-bye. Wow, can't thank Jim Trotter enough. That was an incredible interview. Some very candid responses and great discussion. And really haven't had anything on the Sports Deli like that before, with his insight and experience, having been in the NFL for the better part of 3 decades. And I found some of his answers just incredibly enlightening and fascinating, from what he said about Tom Brady. And good to hear that he's part of the coalition. I just wish he would do more things publicly. Because I just think he's such a powerful voice, and it could resonate with so many segments of the population. His candor with regards to his feelings about the direction and the future of the NFL in terms of people of color in leadership positions. On the one hand, it's disheartening to hear him say that, but he's been covering this league for the better part of 30 years, and he's got a pulse on this thing much differently than I do as an outsider looking in. And so I respect his opinion as much, if not more, than anyone that I've ever heard or read cover this sport. But I hope he's wrong. I hope it happens sooner rather than later. I know there's a lot of different entities, from enough to different segments of the population wanting to see different narratives, not only in the NFL, but in society in general. And so I think if there are people that come together in sports and outside of sports, and there's allies, and there is pressure on sponsors and potential threat of litigation, and social media does its job in terms of putting pressure on organizations and consequently on sponsorships, that I think that this strength in numbers and this united front can make this narrative shift faster than maybe Jim thinks it can. And his comments about Kobe Bryant, as well as the impact that Colin Kaepernick had on him, and how he sort of has pivoted as a writer and as somebody covering this sport now, to shed a greater light on social injustice and humanizing these professional athletes in a way that maybe he hadn't done before. So I thought that was fascinating to hear him talk about that. And it was just a incredibly powerful interview, I thought. Let me know what you think. You can always send us an email to thesportsdeli@gmail.com. You can check us out online at thesportsdelipodcast.com. And again, truly appreciate you sharing space with us. I really hope you enjoyed it. We try to get some of the best guests out there to talk about a number of different issues and have a little bit of fun at the same time. And maybe next time we'll talk to him a little bit about his books and some of his other endeavors that he's hoping to be a part of as he continues with the second half of his professional career. So for Dr. J and Coach K, I'm Hootie Hoot, and do everything you can to be the best version of yourself today. Get out and exercise, just move a little bit. You are what you eat. Don't underestimate the importance of that. And let's stop the Asian hate. Black Lives Matter. And remember, it takes a village. Until next time, much love. Peace.